Hello. The fourth Sunday of Easter is commonly known as Good Shepherd Sunday, and it's a Sunday when we're supposed to reflect on the whole subject of vocation, whether a vocation as a priest, as a single person, a married person, and what it means to be a lay person in the church as well. And this has particular resonance for me this year because it's the 40th anniversary since the National Pastoral Congress. Now, the National Pastoral Congress was called by two of our outstanding bishops here in England, Archbishop Derek Warlock, who is the Archbishop of Liverpool, and our own Cardinal Basil Hume. We have to remember that 1980, 40 years ago, was only 15 years after the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. And in November of 1965, Pope Paul VI issued a fascinating document, a reflection on the role and the mission of the laity. Now, this was unheard of because up until that time, the church had had this very sort of hierarchical understanding of itself. You know, Jesus presided over everything, and then there was the Pope, and then the cardinals, then the bishops, and the priests, and the religious, and finally the laity. But Paul VI swept all that away and rediscovered a very ancient understanding of God's people, a notion that became known as the pilgrim people of God. Well, what's interesting about that title is that a pilgrim is somebody who goes on a pilgrimage, and a person or a people of God are those called to special relationship with the Lord. And Paul VI maintained that all of us are called to that special relationship with God through our baptism. Paul VI proclaimed that our baptism enables us to make that journey together towards God, through which we discover in totality our ministry as priests, people of prayer, prophets, those who seek after justice and truth, and kings, those called to service. And so in Paul's model there was a profound equality, an equality which spoke about pilgrimage and journey, and each person living out their baptismal vocation. Paul said that we discover the richness of our baptismal vocation as Christians, first of all in the home, by the faith that's given to us by our parents and handed on to us, then through our schools, through Catholic education, then in adult formation, and finally all this comes to fruition in works of charity. Well, this, as I say, was a profound new way of understanding the church. 15 years later, 1980, this notion of the church as the pilgrim people of God had still really to get embedded in the life and the understanding of the church here in England and Wales. And this was where Warlock and Hume came in and called the National Pastoral Congress. I went to it. I must have been 17 or 18 at the time, and I was in the sixth form, and each diocese was asked to send a number of delegates. And I have to say, it was a fascinating and hope-filled time. One of the sectors or sections of the report that was eventually produced dealt with the role and the mission of the laity. The National Pastoral Congress said that, of course, it's baptism that forges us into God's people and enables us for service and for mission. And quite frankly, the report states, and I quote here, either we do this or it doesn't happen. Now, in order to be missioners, in order to be the people of God, we have to listen to each other. We have to resist clericalism. People have to use their skills for the good of the church and the good of society. It was said that people were crying out for formation, both theological formation, spiritual and pastoral formation. And they wanted a greater role in the liturgy, especially preaching. Well, that didn't gain very much traction, as you can tell. In the report from the National Pastoral Congress, lay people said to the bishops, be careful. There's a growing sense of frustration engendered by a lack of trust because of an inappropriate exercise of authority by the clerical caste. Those who attended the National Pastoral Congress called instead for a relationship not based on authority, but on trust, on friendship, and on equality. The bishops responded to this report by issuing their own document. It was called the Easter People. And lots of people said, well, why are they issuing their own document? After all, this was an exercise in mutual sharing and journeying and equality. There's been a report. Why do we need a reflection on the report? But the bishops took very seriously their role as teachers, and they wanted to reflect on what had been said to them and to give some sort of response. So the bishops in the Easter People, of course, said that baptism was the thing that forged us into God's holy people. But the mission was the important thing. The mission of God's people was to provide an alternative vision of society. And that was going to show itself in so many ways, including, and I think this was quite prophetic, concern for our planet and witness to a spiritual hunger. We have to remember that the 80s was a time of great sort of, materialism. And I think what the bishops were saying is, don't get swallowed up by all that, but remember the things that speak to our humanity at its deepest level. Well, now we have to kind of whiz forward a few years. 8 years later, Pope John Paul II decided to call a synod once again to look at the vocation of lay people in the church. And John Paul took on a very, very biblical understanding of the role of lay people. At least that's where he begins, in a document which was called Christ's Faithful People, Christi Fidelis Laity, issued in 88. And John Paul takes two particular images. The first is that of the workmen who are called to go into the vineyard, and where Christ says to them, you go into my vineyard too. In other words, what John Paul was trying to teach was that the vocation of the laity was to be active, to be engaged in the world. And then, of course, where does that engagement find its energy? Well, of course, it comes from Christ. And this is where John Paul begins to reflect on the 15th chapter of John's Gospel, where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. In other words, all good work, all mission grows from our relationship and our intimate contact with Jesus Christ. Pope John Paul said it's actually participation in the world that can bring sanctification to the world. He said there has to be a co-responsibility between priests, between the clerical caste and lay people, in order to bring about this missionary endeavour. And also, he said that there was a particular role for women as proclaimers of the gospel. We all have a role in stewardship, said the Pope. We have a role in actually handing on and living the mysteries of our faith. And the mysteries of the faith are something that Francis took up when he wrote his document, The Joy of the Gospel, which was issued in 2013. Pope Francis says, our mission begins when we understand and carry in our hearts the kerygma, that is, the fundamental teaching and understanding of what Jesus Christ came to do. And the kerygma is simply this, that Jesus Christ loves me, that he gave his life to save me, that he is at my side to enlighten and strengthen and free me. But Francis asks, what do we do with those gifts of strength and freedom and enlightenment? His answer, of course, is that we are all called to be what he terms missionary disciples. And so ultimately, thinking about everybody as a missionary disciple, we all have to understand that everything that we are grows out of our baptism, grows out of our relationship with Jesus Christ, and finds its ultimate expression in the way that we work and form a relationship with the world in which we live. And therefore, lay people in particular, thinking about their vocation, have a duty to evangelize, especially in the workplace, through their relationships with other people, and of course, through the family dynamic which we all inhabit. So today, on this Fourth Sunday of Easter, Good Shepherd Sunday, we think about our vocation. We thank God for the gift of baptism, and we ask for the courage to go forward and to live out our vocation as missionary disciples. God bless you all.